There we go. Hello, people. Okay, today we have some of the most challenging content in this course, but also some of the most philosophically, historically, conceptually interesting parts. So what is up? Oh, hello, sir. How are you doing? So far we have been building this toyful little calculus that measures the transit of truthfulness, or as I prefer it, information between a set of formula and a conclusion. Or, in the limit cases, no premises at all and a conclusion. It's fine, Rupert. It's more about the effort. Anyways. Yeah, so we've been having these little toy proofs where we show, some arbitrary set of premises and apply some rules and get a different formula from what was previously given. In fact, let me pull out let me pull out some examples. We're gonna take it from there. Waiting for a FIFA prediction. Is the prediction that the FIFA sucks and is corrupt and everyone of the remaining team fucking sucks? Voted for Argentina because of it. Yep. Well, I mean, it's not very ethical, but whatever. Money's money. Okay, so yeah, we've been lately playing with this kind of exercises where we just have some arbitrary premises and then we do a bunch of rules, blah blah blah, and then we get the result. Some of these have been mildly more interesting, such as this one, in which we're proving not just any arbitrary formula from an arbitrary set of premises, but certain mathematical properties that have, by design, been integrated into our system. Mesisandry. Oh, brother. Ew. What is that? Ew. Ew. Yeah, forget for a moment all of that, and instead let us concentrate on the wonderful, pure world of unchanging mathematics. So this is a kind of slightly more interesting proofs that we have done. We have proven that the conditional and the biconditional are transitive. We have added some extra rules to our system, such as modus tollens, idempotence, the disjunctive syllogism. And they come in these little formulas, packaged into these conditional formulas, and so on. And this so far has allowed us to get familiarized with certain patterns or relationships that are common in mathematics, such as transitivity, commutativity, idempotence, and so on, so on. But what is the point of all this? Why have we been doing this all this mess, from doing truth tables to 3 proofs and defining the system and then doing all these proofs and so on? At the end of the day, we're just manipulating symbols. No, it's actually more than just validation. So let me tell you a story. A story that touches upon the intersection of mathematics and philosophy. Yeah, we're proving. Yeah, but what are we proving? We're just manipulating symbols. We're just operating in formulas. Like, it's time we ask ourselves, who invented this? Why and what for? What is the point of all this? What do we gain by doing this? Unlike conventional arithmetic, like we understand the validity of conventional arithmetic every time we buy something or we sell something, or when we make basic accounting. When we count inventory on a warehouse, it's rather simple why we even use algebra. Calculus was related to astronomy, yeah, but we're not doing real calculus. We're doing propositional calculus. Calculus is a byword of the word calculation. An idea of something being calculation is that you can do it without thinking. Oh yeah, also thanks Nightbot, we have a new Discord. You can join if you want. What is bisexual? I mean, mathematics tend to be aesthetically ROAs. The idea of calculation is that it's just a system. A system in which you have inputs and the outputs are regular based on the input. So if you input the same thing, you get the same output. That's really as far as the definition of calculation go. So we are in a type of calculation or system for calculating things. We are calculating with a very lowercase t, truth. We are calculating if truth is preserved from a set of information to the other. And this information is codified and packed into what we call propositional letters. And propositional letters are just addresses. It's for, I joined the server, my computer is losing it. What? That is odd. I have no idea why your computer will be losing it. But yeah, I see Setter and Rupert. Please follow the instructions so I can get you into the server proper. Yep. So calculus. We're calculating if truth is being preserved, but in a very rather shoddy meaning of truth that we have constantly questioned if this is truth in any meaningful sense. With arithmetic, we know that we are talking about stuff. Stuff abstracted to the point of being considered units. A unit of what? Doesn't matter. It can be money, it can be inventory, it can be a measure, such as centimeters. But the thing we're measuring here is things that can be either true or false and must be true or false. I personally like to call them bits. Yeah, just bits. Bits of information. The pure abstraction of a thing that can be either on or off, or can just have two different values. The designated value and the non-designated value. We kind of went over this, I think, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it can be electrons, it can be computer bits, it can be truth in an argument, with various degrees of success. But the reason why people made this was to calculate mathematical statements. And mathematical statements, thankfully, behave a lot like bits. They are either true or false, and they have to be true or false. And they don't like contradiction. They are either the case or not the case. And ideally never the case and not the case at the same time, the same way. These logical systems were invented, and some people don't like to say discovered. I don't. I like to say that they were invented. And there's a philosophical fight behind the use of those words. Because if you say discovered, that means you believe that the mathematical structure was already there and people just found out how to describe it. If you say invented, then you believe that the mathematical structure had to be properly established by a social group or community to make it understandable. And if this social community or tradition is wiped from existence, then this structure will effectively stop existing along with them. Since I am not a Platonist, I do not believe in the independent existence of mathematical entities, I like to say that this system was invented. It was created by humans. But the reason why it was created was because mathematics during the later half of the 19th century turned inwards. They asked themselves, what makes mathematics true? What is mathematical knowledge? What is a mathematical fact? And all of those questions are philosophical questions. It's an existing set of laws that are described or translated into a form that humans can understand. That is the Platonist interpretation. I don't think those laws exist independent of the human mind, so they are not described or translated. They were invented or created. Again, that is a philosophical stance that is quite apart from knowing how to use the system. I'm just declaring this because this part of the course is unescapably philosophical. Both are true in my opinion. Okay, well, Setter, that is a philosophical posture, and you can defend it if you want to. I am not here to discuss that part of the philosophy of mathematics today. I just like to state out my posture for the sake of honesty. Yep. But the reason why is that mathematicians in the later half of the 19th century started asking themselves those questions that are inescapably philosophical. They were questions regarding the foundations of mathematics. What makes mathematics as a science solid? What makes it true? What makes it valid? What do those terms mean, each one of them? What does it mean for mathematics to be true? What does it mean for mathematics to be valid? And so on and so on. If I prove something through mathematics, is that in any way less or more valid or truthful or solid or believable or acceptable to the community? Stuff like constants exist in reality in some ways, but cannot truly match what humans construct in their mind flesh. I don't know. Those are all tricky questions, and I really invite you all to ponder them and get infected with the philosophy virus, much like I did. The interesting part about this, though, in the context of the course, is that people in the 19th century, they were like, okay, but how? How do I show that what I prove with mathematics is true? Or valid or useful? What does it all mean? So they had like this crisis of faith in the project of mathematics. So mathematics became very concerned with trying to prove its own foundations. The problem is, how do you prove mathematical foundations without mathematics? Or how do you start proving the foundations of mathematics? 19th century means starting with Newton and stuff? No. Newton is way earlier, like 2 centuries earlier. Let me tell you exactly when Newtonian calculus came out. Yeah, late 17th century, so late 1600s. So we're talking about nearly 200 years after that. And no, mathematics in the 19th century was way more advanced, incredibly more advanced than calculus. We're talking about variable curvature geometry. We're talking about, what was the other? I think Gauss. We had Gauss. Yeah. Carl Gauss was doing basically all of the interesting mathematics we still do today in the first half of the 19th century. So after a period of boom in the first part of the 19th century, mathematicians now had like all of these amazing new systems and all of these forms of probability, calculus, geometry. And the most fucked up thing was, some of these systems are inconsistent with each other. They cannot both be taken as true at the same time in the same way. But they are both valid. The most famous and easy to grasp example, I think, will be geometry. I think most people are familiarized with the concept of Euclidean geometry being the standard or safe geometry, as described by the Greek mathematician Euclid. Euclides would say in Spanish, which is a way cooler sounding name than Euclid. So Euclid gave these axioms for what he considered geometry with a capital G. He said, okay, this geometry, it's solved, we're done, that's it. And for thousands of years, geometry stood as a pretty much done science. Like, you didn't study geometry to reinvent geometry, it was just given, and it was just like this perfect model of what knowledge should aspire to. Because geometry, as described by Euclid, was like elegant, consistent, perfect, useful, and considered to be everlasting. And in a way it is. In a way, Euclidean geometry is not wrong. But the funny thing that happened in the 19th century is like, okay, what if we start playing with the axioms of Euclidean geometry? And by changing or playing with those axioms, people got entirely different geometries or ways of doing geometry that were nevertheless consistent and sometimes even more useful for certain astronomical events. Turns out that if you want to do astronomy, you do not use Euclidean geometry, because, I mean, and this was found out considerably later, space-time has curvatures. Space-time does not exist as a flat surface or as a perfectly aligned cube. The space in which astronomy functions or develops can be warped by gravity. So we do not live in an actually Euclidean world or universe. Nevertheless, for ordinary life in most architecture and so on, you're going to use Euclidean geometry, and it's going to work just fine. That will be interesting, Rupert. I have no idea if you have like an insight or information about that. I will ask you to post it on the newly open Discord. Okay, thanks, Rupert, for posting in the new interest channel. I can now give you a role. You should be able to look at the server proper from now on. Okay, so all of this confusion like got into the mind of many mathematicians. Were like, okay, but if mathematics is not a description of reality or the structure of reality as is, what is mathematics? If we're not discovering how things are in a higher, more abstract structure, then what is mathematics if mathematics stopped being something that tried to capture or represent reality and instead became a pure exploration of relationships between concepts? So what is in any meaningful way any of that true? So people started trying to, okay, so how do we prove that mathematics is true? And one such camp was like, okay, we're gonna do a general language for all mathematics. Another camp, okay, we're gonna ground mathematics on something even more fundamental than pure math, which is gonna be pure logic. And some people say, okay, we're going to make a new science. We're going to call it meta-mathematics, beyond mathematics. And the role of this meta-mathematical inquiry is to test and study and prove the eternal truths of mathematics. One of the worst things that can happen when you make a mathematical system is that you later find out that the system is inconsistent. That is, that it is a theorem of the system that you can prove a formula A and a formula not A, such that a statement and its negation are both true in the same time in the same way. In classical mathematics, that means that the system becomes trivial, because then you can prove anything. We recovered that function. Let me find an introduction or elimination of the contradiction. Yeah. We recovered that by having in our system the rule that deals with contradictions. Once we have a contradiction, we can derive anything. And part of the reason why is this very rule, this geometric syllogism. What does this rule mean? Okay, either something or the other. But what if instead of being something or the other, we just say, okay, since I can prove within the system A and not A, which are a contradiction, I can say, contradiction or whatever formula. B is whatever formula. Okay, since contradictions are impossible, I cannot believe a contradiction, so this. Another way of seeing it is that this formula is equivalent to this formula. Well, to be completely rigorous, it is. No, it is. Yeah, we're fine. Basically, this means that, okay, from a theorem, we can get anything. And that's bad. We don't want a mathematical system that can prove anything or can claim that anything is true. We want a calculation system that has discernment. Imagine that you have a calculating system for doing your taxes, and you ask the system, oh, wait, so I owe $2 in taxes? And the system will say, yes. Wait, do I owe $0 in taxes? The system will say, yes. No matter what you ask of it, it will say yes. That's what it means for a mathematical system to be trivial. No matter what you do, it will say yes, which is not desirable. Trivial is another way of saying useless in this case. It serves no purpose. So, several mathematicians have, throughout history, created and worked and used systems that are later proven to be contradictory. So something that the mathematicians of the late 19th century asked themselves is, how do we know that our systems are consistent? How do we know that our methods for proving mathematical stuff are correct? And this eventually gets to the point where people, very serious, fancy people with triple doctorates, ask themselves, how do we know that 1 + 1 = 2? Like, yes, that is the level of philosophical obsessiveness that these people arrived. How can we actually prove that 1 plus 1 equals 2? What does that mean?
What does that mean?
And that's why these different groups created these different projects to find the foundation of all mathematics. And what we're studying, propositional and later first order logic, are the results of this inquiry into the foundations of mathematics. By trying to systematize all possible mathematical thinking into systems, yeah, exactly, Rupert. There you go. The people I'm talking about are those mentioned in that book, in the Gödel, Escher, and Bach. Not so much. I mean, I don't know about Bach. I am not familiar. I know that he was profoundly influenced by mathematics. But yes, one of the big pillars of this movement was Russell and Whitehead's Principia Mathematica, which was published in the early 20th century. The logical system that we have been using, the propositional and logic system that we have been used, is basically the same as the one described in the Principia Mathematica. Which was a book that was supposed to be the principles, therefore Principia, of all mathematics. It is my belief, Rupert, that if we complete this course and you do several exercises, you will be able to understand that book easily. It's a specific barrier of entry, but that is the purpose of this course, to clear that barrier of entry. Anyways. The mathematicians of the early 20th century had this project of solving mathematics once and for all. How do think for a moment what it means for that? What does it mean to solve mathematics once and for all? What will that entail? There are many things in mathematics which have been solved, which are theorems, which are extremely useful. We depend on them for our daily life. And there are things that have not been solved. Let me look for one of the Millennium Prize problems. Okay, the Riemann hypothesis. It's an unsolved problem. People have not solved this problem and very, very notably do not know how to solve it. One of the insights that the people who started doing this mathematical project arrived was that in mathematics, knowing how to solve a problem is basically almost as good as solving it. Knowledge of the method is, in many cases, all you need to get the result. Because in mathematics, what counts is the proof. No, non-tractable. Chess is not tractable. Commutative is a property of connectives. So there are these famous problems in mathematics or conjectures or theorems which, well, not theorems, hypotheses, which people want to prove, but they don't know how. So some people started like getting this fear of, okay, what if these hypotheses, what if these conjectures, it's not that we don't know how to solve them, what if they cannot be solved at all? So think about what just happened there. Instead of talking about mathematics at an object level, people started talking about mathematics themselves. That's why this project was called Metamathematics. Instead of asking, can I solve this? They started asking themselves, can this problem be solved at all? How do I know if a problem can, in principle, even be solved? That is a way more abstract question than the original. So the people that tried to solve all mathematics, they were not trying to solve every individual problem. They were trying to prove that all mathematical problems, properly defined, could, in principle, be solved. That every well-defined mathematical problem has a solution. Spoilers. It doesn't. There are things in mathematics that, even though they are well expressed, well defined, and so on, they cannot be proven. Not only that, we have proven that they can never be proven. Those are called undecidable propositions. But in order to explore not mathematics as an object, or not this specific theorem or this specific conjecture, people needed a language that encompasses all mathematics possible. A way of proving things about all mathematics. Propositional logic is not that language. That would probably be first order logic with set theory. But propositional logic is the prototype. We can call it like a prototype of such a language. So the real interesting thing about propositional logic is not so much like, yeah, you can use it to do like some little baby proofs and so on. You can use it to analyze arguments if you want to. I generally don't think it's that useful. But you could. You can use propositional logic like a medieval scholastic monk to check the validity of arguments if you want to. But the real interesting stuff, and what we're going to do today after this considerable preamble, is to get this bird's eye view of mathematical thinking through the metalogical properties of an information calculus. And I know that's a bit of a mouthful. Let me explain what I just meant, what I just said. It means that rather focusing on specific problems, the insight into mathematical thinking comes from understanding how these systems function from outside the system. What do I mean when I say outside and inside? When I am using the system like this, I am inside the system. I am operating under its rules. But now it's time to ask ourselves the same questions as the people from the 19th century. How do I know this is true? Like, what do I get from this? Okay, I get that the deductive syllogism is valid in propositional logic. So what? I know that the conjunction is commutative. Okay, so what? Is that true in any meaningful way outside the system? Well, yes and no. It means that in every instance that you can successfully compact or compress your problem into propositional logic and then operate through propositional logic, the results will follow from the premises. Okay, but how do we prove that? How do we prove that a formula alpha Okay, let me propose that if the system says that formula alpha follows from a set of premises that actually is that actually preserves truth or my designated value, how do I know that if the system has a syntactic proof, this has a proof, really, it's the same thing, of the formula alpha from the set of premises from a set of premises that prove no, that conclusion, there we go. It sounds almost redundant or repetitive, but it isn't. Having a proof is not the same as being a consequence. We want it to be. The counterexample is obvious. There are many times where people claim that something follows from a premise and they have an argument, and the argument is actually as. We call those arguments fallacies. So another way of saying this is, how do we know that our system isn't fallacious? Okay. But more importantly, a formula is true. Can I prove it? And the other way around. If I have a proof, is it true? That is the most intuitive way to introduce these questions. We have our methods for mapping out the values of the system, such as truth tables and tree proofs and so on. And we have defined a type of consequence by saying, okay, if this is true, then this has to be true. And we have our other system in which we have a set of rules, and we have proofs. How do we know this? Can I prove everything that is true in my system? If I have a proof of something, does it mean that it preserves truth? And for that, we're gonna go back to Mendelssohn. Wait, oh shit, I have been writing all this time without showing it. I am so sorry. Yeah, today what we want to do is explore these relationships described by these funny symbols. This symbol, this straight line with two parallel lines, is our symbol for semantic calculus, the part of the propositional logic system that works through assigning truth functions, such as truth tables. And this symbol, like the sideways T, is for the things we can prove, the things we prove like this, with our inference rules. In the same vein as this introspective foundational thinking of the late 19th century, we're gonna ask ourselves, is our system actually, does it actually work? If I prove something, does that mean that it preserves truth? If I go from a proof of this type, will that proof actually also match if I do a truth table for it? And if I have a sequence of formula that show that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true, can I write a proof for it? This first property is called completeness, and this second property is called correctness. Let me try to illustrate what is at stake here. If my system is not correct, then I can prove things that are false. And that's tragic. Because if I can prove things that do not follow, that do not respect my truth functions, or if I simplify them to say that they are false or incorrect or whatever, then my system is worthless because I can no longer trust the system. Contrast that with systems such as ChatGPT and Work and Grok and all that stuff. When you ask those systems to do something for you, to, through a series of rules, come to a specific result, those systems do not have correctness. There is no guarantee that this computer program, even though it is following a precise set of rules, will arrive at a correct result. If you ask it to prove something, you do not have any trustworthiness of its result. Those systems are not correct, they are not valid. And therefore, they may sometimes arrive at a correct conclusion every now and then by pure chance. But we're not looking for simple luck. We want perfect reliability. We need something that if we have a proof, that proof stands forever, like mathematical proofs so far need to be. So that is at stake here. If we cannot prove that our system is correct, then none of our proofs really mean much unless we independently verify them. If we can prove that the system is correct, then everything I have a proof for is immediately verified. For all cases, for all possible cases, all existent proofs, now and future. And we have an infinite amount of possible proofs. Not arbitrarily long, like a truly infinite amount of proofs. So it's not a simple thing to prove. We will be needing to prove a property across an infinite amount of possible proofs. Now, the other property. If a formula is true, can I prove it? The technological argument was launched years ago and stood from first principle. Generative AI cannot provide reliable output. It is a stochastic process with open goals. Yep, that is the case. So the people who were doing mathematics, they didn't want that. The people who invented this, they wanted a system that they could prove that was completely, universally, eternally reliable. That for every proof that you could create, it will be true. Now let's go for the other one. Can it prove all mathematical truths? This comes from the question of, okay, we have things like the Riemann hypothesis, we have things like the Poincare conjecture. That is a millennium problem that was actually proven years ago. So we have these problems that nobody has solved. How do we know if the problems are solvable in principle? I don't know what the solution is, but I know that the solution exists. That is what this question is asking. If a formula is true, can I prove it? So, if the statement, the mathematical statement, is true or false, whatever, is there a way that I can guarantee that the system can prove it? That is called completeness. If my system is not complete, then what happens? I can start trying to solve a mathematical problem, and I don't have any guarantee that I will eventually arrive at a solution. I can spend potentially millions of years trying to solve the problem, and if the system that I am using is not complete, then there exists a possibility that the statement simply cannot be proven. Not that the proof does not exist yet, rather that the proof will never exist. There is just no way that I can write a proof like this of the statement. So while not being correct is completely tragic, the system is catastrophically useless. If a system is not complete, then I just have this constant perverse mathematical anxiety of, okay, I think this is true, but what if I can never prove it? There is a third property, which we will go, I think it's in the text. Let us go to the text now. But the third property is called decidability. And basically it means that I could, in theory, program a computer system to slowly, or I mean, not really slowly, but I could program a computer system to effectively and eventually create a proof for any well-formed problem that I give it as input. That was the goal, the real golden banana at the end of the mathematical project. Imagine, like, this was the imagined solution of all mathematics. That instead of suffering in proving this or that specific theorem, we could just provide a general method, a general calculus for all possible mathematical statements, such that I will just give it to the computer or the calculation machine and tell it, okay, solve this. And the computer, after a finite amount of time, will give the result, yes or no. So I could just go to the mega magical mathematical computer and give it as input the Riemann hypothesis, and it will eventually crank out the result. Not just the answer, not just the yes or no. It will give a detailed proof of how it got there. That is decidability. Okay, but now let's actually go to the text. So, what we have been doing these last two sessions is explore an axiom system for the propositional calculus. We have already read this, blah, blah, blah. Consequently, another approach by means of a formal axiomatic theories will have to be tried. Although, as we have seen, the propositional calculus renders completely to the truth tables, it will be instructive to illustrate the axiomatic method in this simple branch of logic. So, when they say axiomatic method, the ideal goal was to be able to compress the totality of all possible mathematics into a finite set of axioms. As I said, the model of this was Euclidean geometry that can be compressed into 5 axioms. You only need 5 statements to produce all Euclidean geometry. So the dream of this person, which I've been alluding to, and his team, but this person was called David Hilbert. So the goal of this person, David Hilbert, was to be able to compress all human mathematics into a finite amount of axiomatic statements. So we are going to see the axiomatic treatment of the propositional logic we have been using. We need a countable set of symbols, such as P, Q, R, S, or A, B, C, whatever. These are the symbols from which we make our well-formed formulas, including negations, conjunctions, and so on and so on. There is a subset of the set of expressions of the symbols. So we have a bunch of symbols, but not all expressions, and the expression is just a sequence of symbols, are valid. For example, in the logic we have seen so far, this is not a valid expression because the negation cannot be applied to the conjunction like this. It needs to be applied through the outside of the formula, like this, in chat. And we have the set of axioms of the system L, this Gothic fancy L. We used 12 rules of inference, but in this axiomatic method, they're gonna only use 3 axiom schemas for this, and we'll see why in a bit. In any case, we could, in theory, compress our 12 rules into these 3 axioms. We do so by proving every of our 12 rules of inference through the 3 axioms that we're going to be given. And we have something called rules of inference, which we have 12 of. In this system, we're only going to have 1. Now, I say this system, but this system L and our propositional logic with our 12 rules and many more symbols, they are, for all intents and purposes, the same. They have the same expressive power. You can do the same things with them. You can prove the exactly same amount of theorems in different ways, but the results are the same. So we can conceive of this as a different way of seeing our propositional logic system. It's just a very slimmed down, very minimalistic shape of our propositional logic system. And then we have our definition of proof. Proof is a sequence of symbols such that every formula is either an axiom of the system or a direct consequence of some of the preceding formulas through the rules of inference. We only have one rule, but whatever. A theorem is any well-formed formula, beta, but we just be whatever. Any well-formed formula of the system L, such that it is the last formula of a proof in L. A proof in L is any sequence of symbols that counts as this sequence. In this system so far, we will not have hypotheses. So the difference between proof and calculation is irrelevant. We can only prove proofs. Sorry, this is redundant, but we can only prove theorems. Now, this is the first interesting part. Even if L is axiomatic, that is, if there is an effective procedure for checking any given well-formed formula to see whether it is an axiom, the direction here sucks. What this means is, if there is an effective procedure, and we can have a very long discussion about what it means to be an effective procedure, intuitively, an effective procedure is computable. This is not a fact. Okay? This is a mathematical convention that so far has held. 3 different people tried to solve the question of what it means to be an effective procedure. Those were Alonzo Church, what was the name of Klein? Stephen Klein, and very famously, Alan Turing. So far, effective procedure implies computable. But it is possible that there is an effective procedure which is not computable by any of our current models of computation. It's an unsolved and unexplored area of mathematics and computing. So far we can say, yeah, it's basically the same. For most people, it's basically the same. Effective means computable. And intuitively, what it means is that we can just generate a series of algorithmic instructions to get a proof. Like basically the dream of mathematics that I gave before. We just go to a computer, give the computer instructions, and the computer already has like this effective method for always producing a proof, and they just and it appears. If there is an effective procedure for each and every theorem, then the system is called decidable. And if there is a proof, but the proof cannot be arrived through purely mechanical algorithmic methods, the theory is said to be undecidable. From an intuitive standpoint, a decidable theory is one for which a machine can be devised to test well-formed formulas for theoremhood, whereas for an undecidable theorem, ingenuity is required to determine whether well-formed formulas are theorems. Very intuitively. Okay, that was the other term. Consequence. So a theorem is used for any formula that can be proven from an empty set of premises. Basically, a theorem is a proof from the system. A consequence is an inference from a set of premises. The members of this set of premises, which is usually the symbol gamma, uppercase gamma is often used, is called the hypothesis or premises of the proof. And we use this symbol, which I hinted earlier, as an abbreviation of whatever C is a consequence of gamma. In order to avoid confusion when dealing with more than one theory, we add the subscript. Okay, what does that mean? That means that if we ever see other logical systems, we have to specify in which calculus we're using this. For example, in propositional logic, it's often called PL. But there are other logics. I think one of them was called, for modal logics, K1. And it doesn't really matter what K1 stands for, it just means that there are other logics in which other types of theories and consequences apply. So it's just a general principle of charity to explain, okay, this is a theorem, or this is a proof, this is a consequence in this system. Which hints that mathematics is a lot more relative than we are usually presented to believe. Things are true in the system, but not in others. So the idea of universal truth, okay, I mean, it's universally true in the system, or true for a system, or true for a model. Yeah, mathematics broke down a lot of its loftier goals in the middle of the 20th century. Okay. If it's a finite set of premises, we can just enumerate them. This is just what that means. You can just say premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, premise to the m. This m is just an arbitrary finite number. But we can, and we're gonna use the idea of infinite. An infinite set of premises. Hegel didn't like that. Yeah, well, Hegel died a lot earlier than these people, so tough break. If we're not using any premises, we use the empty set. The empty set is usually symbolized in mathematics as a 0 with a line crossing it. It's also called the null set or nothing set. Yeah, it's rare, but it happens. It's mostly called empty set or null set. And what we want is that for everything that can be proven from nothing, this formula is a theorem and this formula to be a tautology. That is what we want. So sometimes we can just omit the sign empty set and just say this. Basically, what this means is that this follows from nothing, that is, that this is a proof of or a theorem of the system. Okay, and these are some interesting properties of the notion of logical consequence in classical mathematics. This is something the text does not mention, but that is what is this preamble for. The notion of consequence can be relativized to different systems, and different systems will have different properties for the notion of consequence. The first one is one of the most notable examples. Let's take a set of premises gamma. If you can get a formula B, I don't like the symbol. I don't like symbol. It's too hard to read. It's not very dyslexic friendly. If we can just get any formula, let's call it B, from gamma, then you can also get the same consequence from delta, even though delta is even though gamma is a subset of delta. Okay, what does this mean? This means that if you have this set gamma, and gamma is a subset of delta, that means that delta has the same. If it has the same premises as delta, then gamma is delta. They are identical. But if it has more formulas than gamma, delta simply has more premises. So what this means is that once something is a consequence of a set of formula, adding more formulas will not change the result. This is called monotonicity. Let me write it on or monotonicity for the logical consequence. Paraphrasing. Adding more information will not disrupt a result. Once something has been proven to be true, adding more information will not make it false. So, in classical mathematics, if everything is properly made, if everything functions as intended, once something is true, it cannot be disproven. If something in mathematics is disproven, that is catastrophic, because that means that the entire system in which that was built also has to be wrong. This is very much unlike real life. In real life, in a world with change, in a world in which time happens and things evolve, more information can change our conclusions. But in mathematics, once something is proven, it's there to stay. More information does not disprove what we already know. Okay? If you can get a consequence from a set of premises, you only need a finite amount of those premises. If something is a consequence of an infinite set of premises, then there is a finite subset delta of this infinite set that are the parts that we actually require. What this means is that all proofs for propositional logic are finite. we do not need an infinite number of premises, axioms, or proofs, or a proof that has infinite steps to prove something. If we can get a formula B from delta, and for every other propositional letter, every formula in delta, we can get those formulas from gamma, then gamma also implies C. This is just transitivity. It's a very weird way of saying transitivity. We can go from gamma to delta, and from delta to B. Oh, that just means we can go directly from gamma to B. This means that our notion of logical consequence is transitive. Remember the transitive property? If I can get a set of formulas B from a set of formula A, and B implies C, then I can go from A to C directly. So, in summary, our notion of logical consequence for this propositional logic system is monotonic, finite, and transitive. And this is just a paraphrase of what I just went. Okay, in order to get the following results, we're going to compact the system into a very slim form. And let me just skip ahead, because while I really like how Mendelssohn conceptualizes a lot of things, I don't like this typography, and I don't like his proofs. Like they're good, they're valid, but it's just way more difficult. But before we go to another book, I want to read this footnote. The word proof is used in two distinct sentences. First, it has a precise meaning defined above as a certain kind of finite sequences of well-formed formulas in L. L is our system. However, in another sense, it also designates certain sequences of the English language, supplemented by various technical terms that are supposed to serve as an argument justifying some assertion about the language L or other formal theories. So, in mathematics, we have two kinds of proofs. The very decidable, very formal, abstract proofs that we can create by just manipulating symbols, and but the real proofs that real human mathematicians use through English or any other ordinary language. Which are the ones that are mostly used. Why do we still use this confusing, vague language that is English or Spanish or whatever, or Russian, when we have this perfectly computerized mathematical notion of proof? Well, several reasons. One of them is that if you want to prove things about the system which we want to use, we want to prove things about L. So we cannot use L to prove things about itself. That will be circular logic. So, in general, I continue the text, the language we are studying, in this case L, is called the object language, while the language in which we formulate and prove statements about the object language is called the meta language. The meta language might also be formalized and made a subject study, and so on. And we could even have a meta language. However, that almost never happens. Yeah, our vast oceanic souls, and we've only gotten started. We will use the English language as our own formalized meta language. Also, for a substantial part of this book, we use only a mathematically weak portion of the English language. That's really up for the community to decide. The contrast between object language and meta language is also present in the study of a foreign language. For example, in a Sanskrit class, Sanskrit is the object language, while the meta language is the language we use, usually English, because this book was written in English. When we learn English, we as Spanish speakers, then English is the object language and Spanish is the meta language. The distinction between proof and meta-proof being the proofs that we write using English, leads to a distinction between theorems of the object language and the meta-theorems of the meta language. To avoid confusion, we generally use proposition instead of metatheorem. The word metamathematics, remember that? Refers to the study of logical and mathematical object languages. Sometimes the word is restricted to those investigations that use what appear to the metamathetician to be constructive, or so-called finitary methods. So, spoilers. A big reason why we keep using mathematically weak language for mathematics is that most interesting mathematics are undecidable, are incomplete. Indecidable and incomplete. Thanks for the hydrate. That means most mathematics cannot be simply input into a computer and just go ahead and solve it. In fact, most systems cannot prove that they are complete. That is, we do not have any guarantee that I'll get there in a second. We do not have any guarantee that the mathematical problems remaining actually even have a proof. Okay, time for squats. You ain't made me get into my sports clothes. Because we squat deep. And if I squat deep with those pants and not my sporty pants, I'm gonna break them. Okay. Everyone stretch. Make sure your pants are warmed up and not all tense. And let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There we go. So we have a good reference of what mathematical rigor is supposed to look like in these formal systems, but we still have to use this hybrid of English or Spanish or Russian or whatever and mathematics. People in my faculty call this hybrid language logañol or logic español. But yeah, okay. So we're gonna go to another book to prove basically the same things. Just I like the way this other book proves makes those proofs slightly better. This is Metalogic by Hunter. Again, if you ask me, I can give it. I can give you a link with a very good discount. Okay, so we want to prove that our system is correct. That is, if I prove something, then that is a logical consequence. We want to prove that our system is complete. That is, for everything that should be a theorem, there is a proof. And if we can prove both of those things, then the system is golden. It can operate almost by itself, and we can rely on it as long as we can fit our problems into its scope. So the first step in doing that is that we are going to compress our system. Now, we have a bunch of logical connectives. We have the conjunction, the disjunction, the biconditional, and so on. Okay, a very intuitive compression is that, okay, we can define the biconditional as just two conditionals. So instead of writing alpha if and only if beta, okay, instead of doing that, just take it to mean alpha implies beta and beta implies alpha. So I can just define this in terms of this. So I don't need the symbol anymore. Gone. The less symbols I have, the easier the proofs are going to be. So we can do this with just two symbols. We started with 5, now we have 4. So how do we eliminate conjunction and disjunction? Okay, we'll just get there. We'll get there just a bit. First, we need to prove that that our system is adequate for the expression of any function. What does that mean? That means that, so remember when we did a truth table? Yeah, there we go, truth table. When we have two propositional letters, we have 4 possible expressions. True, true, false, true, true, false, false, false. And we have 16 possible results or combinations from this table. We can start from the one that goes all false. So basically, true, true, false, false, true, false, true, false, false, and so on, so on, so on. And then we have the one that is false, 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 true. Now, an interesting thing you can do is that, okay, we have four digits. In binary, you can count up to 16 with 4 digits. So you start from 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then you go 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. That means 0. That means 1. 0, 0, 1, 0 means 2. 0, 0, 1, 1 is 3, and so on. So the interesting thing is that we can order our truth expressions as the natural numbers. That means that we have a beginning, and we have the one that follows, and we have the one that follows, and we have the one that follows, and so on. So if I can provide a method that maps out to the natural numbers, I can prove that a set of connectives can express all possible combinations, because the combinations can be ordered along the lines of the natural numbers through the use of binary. Everyone with me? Does that make sense? So turns out that is very easy to do with just the negation, conjunction, and disjunction. Because, for example, if I want to count to 0, that's simple. I just need to define as something that gives me 0 or pure false using just conjunction and negation. That's very simple. Whenever the result is 0, that is when everything is just false, I can just write a contradiction. Alpha and not alpha. Because that is a contradiction, that is always false, and so that is always 0. If I want to write a formula that gives me 1, basically only the last element is true. Okay, I just deny the first and say, and the second. And that is false, 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 true. Oh wait, no, but I messed up because I cannot make it both on the same symbol. Nice. I don't know why you got ads. I have it set up so that you only get ads at the start. Whatever. Actually, no, this is gonna be... If I want this to give me F false, 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 false. No, it's gonna be not A and not B. There we go, okay. Okay. Sorry. Not A and not B is gonna give me false, 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 true. And then I just take away negations. Not A and B is gonna give me false, false, true, false. So I'm counting 0, 1, 2. This is gonna give me false, true, false, false. 0, 1, 2, 3, and finally A and B is gonna give me true, false, false, blah, 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 blah. You get it. Okay, but what about the in-between parts? I already have a general method for getting any address, any specific address, with just conjunction and disjunction. I can count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Actually, no, I cannot count to 3. I have covered the spaces in which there is only one true. But what happens when there is more than one? Okay, simple. If I have a formula that corresponds to false, 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 true, and false, false, true, false, and I want to get false, false, true, true, I simply put 1 and 2 together. I simply pull the formula that corresponds to 1, which is this, not A and not B, and say, or the formula that corresponds to true, which is not A and B. So you see what I'm doing here? These are like my prime numbers. But for binary. Like, these are just the numbers in which I only have one true and the rest are false. And if I ever need a formula in which there is more than one true, I just stack together those formulas through the use of the disjunction. So that is exactly what the proof is going to be like. In order to prove that this set is adequate for expressing all possible combinations, and I need that in order to prove that my system is complete. Proof. Intuitively, the proof consists in showing that given any complete truth table, we can construct a formula in disjunctive normal form. This is what I just did here is an explanation of how disjunctive normal form works. It's just a fancy name for saying, okay, just crunch out the addresses one by one and then add them with disjunction if necessary. A formula is in disjunctive normal form if and only if it is a disjunction of conjunctions of single propositional symbols or their negations, counting as degenerate cases of disjunctions. Yes, what this means is that we can treat them as numbers, but once you have sufficient mathematician brain, you realize that a number is just an order. It's just a way of organizing things. So something being a number, once you have mathematical brain damage, is basically that it can be ordered as if they were the natural numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3.5, and so on. Or you can order them as if they were the real numbers, in which case they go from 0, 1 to 2, but they always have something in the middle. 0.5, 0.25, and so on and so on. The real numbers are thens. Like the steps in the algorithm in exercises of previous sessions. Kinda, really. It's more like just putting things in the structure of the natural numbers is going to be very useful for when we do a special type of proof, which we'll go over in a second. It just means that you can number things. So it is exactly the same as I just went. Instead of going A, B, and C, we just have P1, P2, and P3. Haha, P2. So it's just a way of covering all possible truth tables with formula. That's really all there is. This is just a proof that we can cover all possible truth tables with just the conjunction, disjunction, and negation. So first we define disjunctive normal form, which we just did. And we just went over it like this. So the proof is as follows. Let be any arbitrary truth function, basically any truth table of any arbitrary number of arguments. Write out the complete truth table corresponding to F. It will have n plus 1 columns and 2 to the n rows. Look at the truths and falsehoods of the last column, basically the result. The column that gives the values of the truth function of the sets, the arguments, the corresponding rows, basically the resulting combination of the formula. There are three possibilities. The last column is all F's. There is exactly one T in the last column, or there is more than one. Okay, but I just did it. I just showed how to build it. I can build any arbitrary truth function through the method of disjunctive normal form. If it's all false, then I just write a contradiction. If it only has one truth, then I just need to check at the table and check which one is true. So for example, in this one is true, false, true. So I just need to write a formula that goes first letter true, and negation of the second letter, and third letter true. I don't know why I mixed the symbols, whatever. And I can build it. See, it's just what I wrote. First formula, first letter true, second negation, third as is. If there is more than one T, I just repeat the same method I just did for every space in which it's true, and then I just join all of those results through disjunctions. And that's it. And we have solved our first metatheorem. We have proven that our set of connectives is adequate. We can express all possible truth functions, all possible combinations with our system. But we're gonna go even slimmer. Okay, we just proved that conjunction, disjunction, and negation is adequate. So if I can just define conjunction and disjunction through conditional and negation, I have also proven that it is adequate. So I can just define conjunction as this and disjunction as this. So by just doing a mechanical decidable replacement of operations, I can just replace all of these formulas into conditional negation. It's a major pain in the ass, but it's doable. As long as it's doable in principle, that's all it counts. So we have proven that we can express all truth functions with just conditional and negation. Okay, these are just exercises for the reader. We can even simplify even more and get one simple connective. But I mean, this is just for this is interesting. This is NOR and NAND are also adequate connectives. The set of just conjunction and disjunction is inadequate because we still need a negation. And these are just like exercise for the reader. For example, we can prove this is inadequate. Simply, yeah. That's why he was mentioning them. We can prove this is inadequate because this set can never produce a contradiction. So we can never model all false. And that's it. That's really all we need to do. Okay, what else is there? Let's get to the actual. Okay, this is good stuff. Okay, so remember we have our 12 rules. In this highly compressed, slimmed down version of propositional logic, we're only going to have 3 axioms. Notor is my favorite Star Wars Vidya. I like Notor 2, the shitlords, more. Okay, let's imagine that A and B and C are any arbitrary well-formed formulas. So our axioms are going to be the following. A implies that B implies A. This is in our system called conditionalization. A implies B implies C implies that A implies B implies A implies C. This is called extrapolation. And we proved this last week. Not A implies not B. Implies B implies A. This is called transposition. So instead of using 12 rules, we could, if we were so inclined, use only these 3 schemas. For example, these are axioms of our system. What I mean is, as long as anything has the same structure and is applied to well-formed formulas of our language, this is an instance of axiom schema 1. This is an instance of conditionalization. 1 implies that 2 implies 1. So instead of using PQRS, we're going to start using numbering P's. Why? Because if they are numbered, they are well ordered. We have 1, we have 2, we have 3, and so on. We have a very clear order on how they operate. So I know it's not very easy to read, especially if you are dyslexic, but please bear with me. So this is an instance of the axiom schema of 1. This is also an instance. Yeah, that is exactly how you write them. P with apostrophe 1. So imagine that this is just A, this is just B, and this is just C. Really, what matters is just that they are distinct and ordered. That's really all we care about. So this is also a schema of 1, even though the second element is a repetition of the first. P implies that P1 implies P1. And we can even introduce more complex formulas, such as not P implies that P implies not P. Anything that fits the schema goes. There is no question of these axioms being self-evident truths or anything like that. They are merely strings of symbols of the alphabet of P, capable of being interpreted, certainly, but defined without any reference to any interpretation. This is the modern notion of axiom. In mathematics, axioms no longer refer to self-evident truths or representation of the structure of reality. They are merely strings of symbols that are useful within a system. That's it. Okay, the only rule of inference that we have for our slimmed down version of propositional logic is modus ponens. Modus ponens, or MP for short. The immediate consequence just means like the final part. For example, in these formulas, this is the immediate consequence of this whole formula because it is the consequent of the conditional. And the proof is our definition proof is the same one as we just had. It's just a lot more constricted. It's a finite but not empty string of formulas of the language P, such that every formula has to be an axiom or an immediate consequence by the rule of inference, which is just modus ponens. So everything is just one of those three axioms or modus ponens. That's it. That's all we're gonna count. And these are examples of proofs using the slimmed down version of propositional logic. They are a major pain in the butthole. And while you can certainly do them, this definitely goes beyond the scope of a Logic 101 course. This is not something I would recommend people who just want to understand mathematical logic do. This is for sickos and freaks. So we're going to define the split between derivation and proof, as we have done. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine, Rupert. You're not supposed to get this freaky like this. You're just doing this overview because we want to show what the real purpose of propositional logic is. The purpose of propositional logic is not just to making like toy proofs. The purpose was to provide us a general framework that allows us to understand how mathematical thinking works. And the useful parts were more about realizing that mathematical thinking, at least classical mathematical thinking, wants things to be monotonic, finite, and transitive. Those three properties. That is what modeling the system allowed us to glimpse. And we saw the same properties. This is just more properties of the logical consequence. This is idempotence. Basically, any formula is a consequence of itself. This is monotonicity again. Adding more information does not take away conclusions. This is transitivity. If a set of formulas implies A and A implies B, then the formula implies B. Now, this is a very interesting one, 23.4. If a formula implies A, if a set of formula implies A, and a set of formula implies A then B, then the formula implies B. Why? It's very simple. If I can get, like, if I just have this, and then I get A, and then I have A implies B, I can just get B by modus ponens. I don't even remember this as a name. It's just a very obvious consequence of how we had defined modus ponens. So, 23.5 is just a consequence of transitivity. It's a special case. If A is a theorem, then A follows from any arbitrary set of premises. We can get 23.5 from 1 and 2. And 23.6 is just a definition of theorem. Yeah, this is just more like a way of understanding how certain mathematical thinking has worked. Now let's see. Let me find like the actually interesting. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what's the if and only if? If with double F is if and double if and only if, aka be conditional. It goes both ways, basically. So first we're going to prove that our system is consistent. What does that mean? That means that in this system, there is no formula in the system of which both the formula and the negation are theorems of the system. And there is an even more technical notion of consistency. A system S is absolutely consistent if and only if at least one formula of the system is not a theorem of S. What does that mean? That means that the system is not trivial. Absolute consistency is the same as not trivial. If in a system every formula is a theorem, we call that system trivial. And we call that system not having even absolute consistency. So we need to prove that we cannot prove a formula and its negation in the system. We're going to give an interpretation of P and show that only that all of the theorems of PS come out as true. So we're going to prove something even stronger. If the formula A is a theorem of our system, then it is true for the interpretation, and therefore by clause 2 of our definition of true for interpretation, not A is not true for the interpretation, and therefore not A is not a theorem. That is, for any formula of A of the system P, if A is a theorem of PS, then not A is not a theorem. That is simple consistency. And absolute consistency follows from the previous, because there is at least one formula that is not a theorem. So the proof is simple. If we show, this is the reason why we slim down the system to 3 axioms and 1 rule. Because if we prove that the 3 axioms are true for any interpretation, aka they're tautologies, and that the modus ponens preserves truth, then we're good. We cannot get to falsehood from truth if the only rule we have is truth preserving. That's why instead of using our 12 rules, we're only using 1. Now, the thing is, we can express the 12 rules with just this slimmed down version of the system. We can. But it's fucking painful. Because those proofs are just a hand torturing sequence of P like this. It just goes like this. And some of the proofs require 80, 120 steps on paper. Yes. We're basically... It's funny that you mentioned compression, because computer compression depends on this. Yeah, no, that's why I consider that for freaks. We're just gonna let the people who already did the math do it for us. But the idea is solid. By compressing our system to the barest minimum, we just need to prove the properties that we need for these four things. So we prove it for those four things, we're good. It's done. We have compressed the amount of proofs we need to do. So the regions of compression and purification. Yes, exactly, yes. That this is something that that helped me understood why how quadratic formulas work. They are just expressing the same information in a more compact package. Likewise, expressing a chicharronera is an is a particular case of extrapolating a compact formula. But ultimately, and this is when everything started clicking together, we are still following the rules of finitude, monotonicity, and transitivity. Transitivity means that every step of the way carries onto the next. Monotonicity means that we are never adding or we're never, even though we add information, we are never losing what we already knew to be true. And finitude means that every process in basic algebra has to be done in a finite number of steps. By understanding the general properties, I started to understand how math works in a more general level. So the only rule of inference of PS preserves our truth for interpretation. Basically, for any arbitrary pair of formulas A and B, if A and B are both true for interpretation, then B is true for interpretation. Proof by 1905. Okay, so let's go to 1905. But it's very simple. I mean, we know how modus ponens works. We have done the truth table for the modus ponens. There is never a case, by the definition of the modus ponens, in which if A is true and A implies B is true, for B to be true without contradiction. And that's it. That's really all we need. So, because the modus ponens preserves truth, and because of our three axiom schemas are tautologies, we can only prove more tautologies. The total information of the system will never increase. We will never get a falsehood if we only start from truth. And thus, we can never get a negation of a theorem, because the negation of a theorem must always be false, and we have a system that can only prove true things. Or put it another way, we have a system that only preserves the designated value, and contradictions by definition always have the non-designated value, and we have no way of producing a formula that has non-designated values out of only designated values. Thus, we can never prove a formula A, such as we can also prove a formula not A. And that actually is a very strong proof, because we have proven that as long as something is syntactically a proof. Wait, no, we have proven a slimmer version of this. We have proven that for every theorem, then the theorem is a tautology. So that's good. We can only prove things that are always true, which is what we wanted, which is what we programmed the system to do. So that means that the system is correct. Everything that we do everything that we ask the system to prove will be true for the rules we set it to be true. So it's not a very interesting notion of true, but at least it works. It will never lead us astray as long as we restrict ourselves to a very specific type of information calculus. Is this particularly interesting? Not really. I mean, these are interesting, and I would like to dissect them, but I think they are a little bit too much for an introductory course. Again, if you want to go over them, that's perfectly fine. Just ask me, and I can share the discount for this book. But this is the fun stuff. Okay, so you notice that so far we have used something called hypotheses and soft proofs. It's when we have a proof, blah blah blah, any formula. Okay, since we're doing methodologic, we're going to like P, blah 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 blah, and then we do something like, okay, let's open a new soft proof, and then I do something like, okay, let's get this formula by hypothesis. Okay, and then after this soft proof, I do this. Okay, well, if this were true, then this were true. I ask you to just buy it from me. Just get it. But now we're going to prove that that is the case. And the proof of this and the application of the soft proof is something called the metatheorem of deduction. And it is a very interesting mechanism of how it shows that the general structure of logical consequence for classical logic is reproduced in the conditional and in the modus ponens, which I think for many should be kind of obvious by now. The deduction theorem for propositional logic is as follows. If a set of formula that has gamma and A, if B is a derivation from this set of formula, will this help you improve your chances of getting the body on the tree? Yes. Because this will help you learn math, and math will help you learn geometry, and geometry will help you make the shot on the spot. Yeah. So if you can get B as a derivation from gamma and alpha, you can get A implies B from alpha, from gamma, my bad. In other words, if B is a syntactic consequence in propositional logic of the set, this means union. Basically, gamma plus alpha plus A. I don't want to call it alpha. Then A implies B is a syntactic consequence of gamma alone. This in turn means if there's a derivation in propositional logic of B from this, then there is a derivation in PS of A and B from gamma alone. The deduction theorem implies that if there is a derivation in propositional logic of P1 from P union P2, then we can get P2 implies P1 from just gamma. If there's a derivation in propositional logic of P1 from just P2, because nothing plus something is just P2, it means that P2 implies P1 is a theorem. This is just an instance, a limit case of when gamma is the empty set. It can be seen from the deduction theorem that if alpha, then if B is derived from A, then A implies B is a theorem of the system. What does derivation mean exactly, to make sure I get this? Okay, so we have defined proofs and derivations. Derivation is when you get a logical consequence from a syntactic method, such as like the rules, but there are elements as premises. And proof means that you made a sequence using our syntactic system, our rules and shit, from no premises. So derivation, there is premises. Proof, there are no premises. Proofs produce theorems. But the deduction, the metatheorem of deduction, gives us a way to get theorems or to get proofs from derivations. So we found out that those notions are much closer, or they can be defined in terms of the other. So for example, I'm going to highlight. This means that B is a derivation from A. A is a premise and B is a consequence of that premise. But through the metatheorem of deduction, we can get this. A implies B is a theorem of the system because the premises we have moved to the side. What this means, largely speaking, is that the conditional reproduces the structure of proof. The idea of the proof is this. We suppose that for an arbitrary set gamma of formulas of our system and an arbitrary formula A of P, there is a derivation of, in our system, of a formula B from gamma union with A. We show how, given such a derivation, to construct a derivation in PS of A implies B from gamma alone. We conclude that if there is any derivation in PS of B from gamma union A, then there is a derivation in PS of A implies B from gamma alone. The proof has to show that given any arbitrary derivation of B from gamma union A, there is a derivation of A implies B from gamma alone. So what we do is first consider all derivations of B from gamma union A that are exactly one formula long and show how to construct in any such case a derivation of A implies B from gamma. A derivation that need not just be one formula long. Then we show that if the deduction theorem holds for all derivations of B that are less than k formulas long, where k is just any arbitrary positive integer, then it will hold for all derivations such that are exactly k. What does this all mean? This book is highlighting that the proof is by mathematical induction. So mathematical induction is a way of proving things for an infinite amount of cases. It follows from the same logic as transitivity. We prove, in order to prove something as a mathematical induction, we need to prove it is a case for the case 1, the basic case, the starting case. In this case, it is where the derivation is one formula long. Now, it might seem that we then need to prove, okay, so we need k2 for 2 formula long, and then k3. I fucked this up. And then case 3 and case 4 and so on until case n. But if we do this one by one, we will never end. That will be an intractable and indecidable exercise. We do not have a finite method for solving this. So what we instead do is order the things in such a way that we have transitivity. If we prove for one, then it proves for the next. So it proves from the next to 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 the next. So because it works for the first, and if it works for the first, it works for what follows, then the first case shows the second one shows the third one shows the fourth, the fourth, the fifth, and so on, infinitely. That is how mathematical induction works. And mathematical induction, as we said last week, is an infernal engine. It never stops. So, usually, proofs of mathematical inductions have 2 parts. The base case, which is K1, and then what's called the inductive step, such that if it works for k to the n, which is an arbitrary amount, then it has to work for k. Sorry, I fucked up. It works for k to the m, then it works from k to the n. Or, if you prefer, if it works for kn, then it has to work for kn plus 1. So I am not asking you all to do this proof. That will be actually doing mathematics, and we are just a course for understanding mathematics. But understanding how mathematical induction proofs work is extremely good. It's among the most powerful tools a mathematician has at their disposal. So we want to prove that it works from less than k, so k minus 1, then k1. It's the same. It just differs for different styles among authors. But basically what just means that if it works for the previous one, then it works for the next one. And from those 2 results and the fact that by definition any derivation in PS is only finitely long, it follows that the deduction theorem holds for all derivations of B from from gamma union A. The form of the proof described in the last paragraph is known as proof by strong mathematical induction. Its 2 stages are known as the basis and the induction step. See, this is why I like Hunter for the actual proofs better. It's a lot more clear, a lot more baby-like. In the basis of a proof by mathematical induction, we establish that the theorem, whatever it is, holds for the minimal case. In the present proof, where the derivation is 1 formula long, which is the minimal step. There cannot be a more minimal case than this because derivations have to be at least one formula long. In the induction step, we prove that if the theorem holds for all cases up to an arbitrarily large given point, then it also holds for the cases to the next higher point. If it works for this one, it works for the next. This will be a strong induction. A weak induction is one in which the induction step shows that if the theorem holds for all cases at an arbitrary given point, then it holds for all cases at the next higher point. The distinction is worth remembering. But not really important point. I hope I made it time for logic nice for me. Don't worry, Janice, because we always have the VODs. Thank you for giving me a good excuse for sharing the playlist. So you can always join up or catch up by watching the... I hope you're joking. I really hope you're joking. Please do not neglect your kids. If you reproduce, which is already a mistake, but if you reproduce, give your offspring lots of love and care. Do not neglect your kids. Yeah, you can always catch up with the VODs. The playlist is there. Now, where were we? Okay, yeah. So we're gonna use the basis case. The basis case is in which the n is 1. But the only case in which the n is 1 is in which the formula itself is in the set, or the formula is an axiom of our system. Those are the only two options. Let D be a derivation in our system of B from this, gamma union alpha. That is exactly one formula long. We shall show how, given D, we may construct a derivation such that we will call it D1, and which need not be of length 1, and of A implies B from gamma alone. So this is important. Just because our induction case has only one step, A implies B, does not need to be only one step. Since D is a derivation of B, and is exactly one formula long, then D must, in this case, consist simply of the formula B by itself. In that case, the only step, the step n, is step 1, and the step 1 has to be B. Because in order for something to be a consequence, it has to be the last line in a derivation. So B has to be the first and only and last line in this derivation. Since there are no formulas in D preceding B, B cannot be an immediate consequence of PS because we need at least two formulas to have a direct consequence, because modus ponens, our only inference rule, can only function with two previous formula. So by the definition of derivation in PS, B must be either an axiom or in the set gamma union A. This gives us three cases to consider. 1, B is an axiom. 2, B is a member of the set gamma. 3, B is A itself. There are no other cases. You just lost your Hatsune Miku? Are you from Norway? Are you referring to the fact that I'm sorry, chat, I'm gonna give a naughty word, the British one? Harsh. So there are no more cases. In our basic case of only one line, these cover all possible steps or all possible cases. There are no more cases. We show in each of these cases how to construct the derivation D1 with A implies B as the last formula, satisfying the condition that is a derivation from D alone. So we have three cases for the basic case 1. So first case, B is an axiom. Then we just produce the formula by this. B has to be an axiom because this is our hypothesis. So then we use the axiom of conditionalization, which is our axiom 1. And then we use modus ponens, and that's it. And because B is a proof, and we're only using, because B is an axiom, and we're only using axioms on modus ponens, then this has to be a proof of PS. In this case, gamma is redundant. We don't need gamma because all of this can be constructed from the MP set. Case 2, B is in a set of gamma. Then it's the same case, except that instead of justifying from axiom, we say, okay, it's a given because it's from gamma. And that's it. The case 2 is identical to the first one. It's just that in the first one, we get it from the empty set. And in this case, we get it from gamma. Case 3, B is A itself. Then we do this chorizo. Because we just need to prove A implies B, but in this case, B is A. So what we really need to prove is A implies A. And here we have a general structure for proving any formula implies itself in PS. This is a proof of A implies A, and A is any arbitrary formula, and therefore automatically a derivation of PS of A implies B from any set of formulas of P you like to take. So, yeah. So we have proven our base step. If the deduction only has one line, then it collapses in one of these cases. If the induction has more than one line, then we're gonna assume that we have proven it from the step previous, and then we want to prove it for the next one. So it calls for any derivation of the length k. Do we just need D to prove that it's not A, or can you just prove that A is A easily? This does not mean that A is A, because we do not have an identity. A is A will be this, but in this system we do not have equals. We have A implies A, which is not the same. And I mean, it's not really easy, but the author proved it for us. The author proved that in classical logic, in classical propositional logic, every formula implies itself. So, okay, it holds for every derivation less lengthy than the one we're in. So let D be any derivation of B from gamma union A of length k. There are 4 cases to consider. 1. B is an axiom. 2. B is in a set gamma. 3. B is in A itself, which are just the same cases we just went through. And the only interesting case is 4. B is an immediate consequence by modus ponens of 2 preceding formulas in D. 4 is the only worthwhile case considering, because otherwise we can just go, okay, we just proved that. Case 4. B is an immediate consequence by modus ponens of 2 preceding formulas in D. Let these 2 formulas be Di and Dj, where I is a smaller number than k, and so is j. So basically, both of these formulas precede B, and B is our limit case. So they have to be before. Then Di is either D implies B, or Dj is okay, basically, at least one of those has to be what implies B. Either Di implies B or Dj implies B. It doesn't matter which alternative we take, so let's just go from J. So the length of the derivation of di from this is less than k. But that is what we already assumed. That we assume that we already have such a solution because it is one step less than the one we have. So imagine we have, this is of a sequence of 4. The case of 4 can be collapsed into one of the previous ones by either being 1, 2, or 3. Or whether the formula we want to have is a direct consequence by modus ponens of 2 other formulas. But the 2 other formulas have, by necessity, to be previous in our derivation. Derivations are, therefore, this continuous worm-like structure. Or, I don't know if you played Snake on your cell phone, the Snake game where you just eat a pebble and the snake grows one more step, one more step, one more step. Modus ponens can only extend a derivation under 2 conditions. That there is a conditional and there is an antecedent. So the length of those previous derivation is a self-prolonging chorizo, yes, but it has to grow under very specific rules. That's only it. That's really the whole trick. That we have defined this sequence by only growing in one of 4 specific terms. Snake IO, yeah, kind of like that. So the length of the derivation of the previous formula is less than the step we're in. So we have to be able to produce A implies that previous step by the metatheorem we're proving. Similarly, we have that A implies the formula that implies B. So 1 implies that 2 implies 3. But we have the axiom of extrapolation. The axiom of extrapolation shows that if we have 1 implying 2 implying 3, then 1 implies 2 implies that 1 implies 3. Thus, by using our induction hypothesis, we can extrapolate and show that if there is a proof, and eventually in this proof we have B, and previously in this proof we need to have V1 implies B and V2, because they are previous on the formula and by our inductive hypothesis, we know that at least one of these cases has to be 1, 2, or 3. So we already proved 1, 2, or 3. So we know that they're safe. So we can just use the metatheorem of deduction on those cases. I know it sounds weird. We're kind of using the thing we want to prove in our proof. Yes, that is the strength of mathematical induction, but only because they are previous in our more complex case. So now that we have these two, we know the following by the metatheorem of deduction. We know that A implies V2, and we know that A implies V1 implies B. Both of these, by the very metatheorem of deduction, we want to prove. But we can count on them because we're saying if it counts for the previous, and these are the previous, then it counts for the following. It kind of sounds like we're cheating. I had a lot of confusion the first one. This was explained to me. But we're not cheating because we already proved the previous case. That was our basic example, our basic case. Our basic case we already proved here. So we can already rely on those previous cases. We're not really cheating. As long as the elements that we are using come previous in our chain. So because we already have this, we can generate. I mean, it's easy when the proof is already done for you. We're not doing the proof, we're just trying to understand the proof. So because we have the axiom 3, so not axiom 3, axiom 2, the axiom of extrapolation. This is the antecedent of the axiom of extrapolation. And this is the antecedent of the consequent of the axiom of extrapolation. So eventually, by doing modus ponens and modus ponens, we get what? A implies B. So what does the metatheorem of deduction allow us to do? The metatheorem of deduction is what allowed me to do this. I have proven this formula from nothing. Only axioms and our basic rules. So, let me copy and paste the syntactic. So basically this. And the metatheorem of deduction allows me to basically convert this conditional into this. And that's what I meant earlier, that the conditional recovers the structure of our general notion of logical consequence or logical implication. So what this means is that this formula can further be abstracted into Did you draft this up earlier today, or the stream, or is this sample from a book? This is something we made last week, and this is, whoops, this is from a book. This is called Metalogic by Hunter G. Let me tell you exactly. What? The full title of the book is Metalogic, an introduction to the meta theory of standard first order logic by Geoffrey Hunter. Again, if you ask me, or if you ask in the Discord, which is being promoted, I can get you a good discount. Thanks for the stand up and stretch. All right, so what this means is that whenever I have this, or I can abstract even further, a the union of A and B and not A, whoops, so I can do this kind of thing. I can, the metatheorem of deduction is what allowed me to transform this proof into a general rule, because I know it can be generalized through the metatheorem of deduction. The metatheorem of deduction is what allows me to do this rule, more specifically, the introduction of the conditional. Because it means I can turn proofs into conditional statements. That is really the most powerful aspect of the metatheorem of deduction. It allows us to convert proofs into conditional statements and conditional statements into proofs. Now, the last thing we're gonna suggest is this. Concepts of semantic completeness. Importance for logic of a proof of the adequacy and semantic completeness of a formal system of truth-functional propositional logic. Completeness in general. Very roughly, a system is complete if everything you want as a theorem is a theorem. As in the case of consistency, which we proved earlier, the notion of completeness of a logic system has a semantical motivation consisting roughly in the intention that the system shall have all possible theorems not in conflict with the interpretation. This leads to several purely syntactical definitions of completeness. This was said by Alonzo Church less than 100 years ago. We shall put off consideration of syntactic notions of completeness until Proposition 33 and concentrate here on the next few sections on semantic notions of completeness. What do logicians want? The holy grail of logic will be a system or set of systems that cut all truths of pure logic, whatever that means. This nobody has yet found, and nobody will. All truths of pure propositional logic then, but they include non-truth functional truths, and the task of systematizing this is not yet finished. It is hardly begun. So we asked, what do we want that we have some hope of getting? Here an answer is, all truths of pure truth functional propositional logic. We shall show that there is a sense in which our system does catch all the truths of pure truth functional propositional logic, and we now try to make clear what this sense is. So we want the guarantee that any problem well defined that can be expressed in our system and is true can be proven to be true. One of the most fundamental, important, vital notions of modernity in general, not just mathematics, in general, is that proof and truth are different domains. Things can be true without us being able to prove they are true. Ideally, for logicians, the holy grail will be, oh, I have the guarantee that I can prove all of the true things in my domain. Well, for this baby system, for propositional logic, we get that. We can have that. The sad part is that propositional logic is too small, too limited to express any real meaningful mathematical content. But let us continue. In the first place, the language P of PS is adequate for the expression of any truth function. We already proved that. This does not mean that P is capable of expressing any truth about truth functions. It cannot, for instance, express the truth that there are no denumerably many distinct truth functions. Basically, it cannot express things about itself. And it does not mean that every truth functional tautology, in an intuitive sense, belongs to P. For P has only the two connectives, negation and conditional, and the tautology. I mean, yeah, this, strictly speaking, does not belong to P, but we can get an equivalent formula, and that's good enough. So that's what the text means by truth functional equivalent. But we can get from the proofs of metatheorems 21.1 and 22.2 is this. First, any truth functional formula f with arbitrary connectives could be correlated with a unique formula in disjunctive normal form. So basically, we can compact all truth functions into this system. Not the same formula as written, but the same values. Second, any such formula in disjunctive normal form can be correlated with a unique formula of P having the same truth table. Yeah, there we go. Nothing we say here ensures that there is a 1-to-1 relationship between F and the formula of P. Two or more distinct formulas, say F and F1, might both be correlated with the same formula of P. Nevertheless, to any formula F, there will be correlated in what we hope the reader will allow to be a reasonably natural way, a unique formula of P having the same truth value. So we claim that every truth functional formula can be represented in a natural way by some formula in P. Basically, compact. Hello, potentially famished. Welcome. Thanks for becoming a Samigo. We are currently going over the correctness and completeness theorems for propositional logic. So we are about to show completeness. We showed correctness a while ago. Second, we shall show that every tautology of P, our system, is a theorem in PS. So everything that is true, we can prove. That's some advanced math for you. Don't worry, because we have the whole course is on a playlist, so you can join us if you want. This is slightly different. I mean, this is absolutely speaking a type of Boolean algebra, and many of the insights we cover here will definitely help you. So it's not so much different, more advanced, as it's just different. So, taking in conjunction with what we just said, every truth functional tautology is or can be represented in a natural way by some theorem of PS. Yeah. This is a result that will have delighted the Stoic logicians, who were the first to work systematically on truth functional propositional logic and who claim completeness for their work. Yep. So yeah, brief aside, the Stoics were also very advanced logicians, not just Aristotle. A bit on the right to the Stoics. Accordingly, we define the following notion of completeness for arbitrary formal systems of truth functional propositional logic, such as this. A formal system S, whatever, with a language L is complete with respect to the class of all truth functional tautologies, that is, the formulas which we want to express as always true, if and only if 1. L is adequate for the expression of any truth function. So basically, if we cannot express the truth function, then we cannot prove it. So it cannot even be expressed in the system. And 2. Every tautology of L is a theorem of S. So everything that we can prove to be true, we can prove to be a theorem in our deduction system. So 2 weeks ago we said we need a deduction system because truth tables, while very valid, they are not a tractable system for proofs because they grow exponentially. So we set out to build this proof system And only now do we have the guarantee that the proof system correlates with what we know through truth tables. Okay, we still need to prove it. So, PS is complete with respect to the class of all truth functional tautologies if and only if P is adequate for the expression of any truth function, we proved this earlier, and 2, every tautology of P is a theorem of PS. That is what we need to prove. Usually, in the literature, proofs of completeness tacitly assume known results about adequacy, and they concentrate simply on showing that every tautology expressible in the language in the system is a theorem. We have already proved adequacy. We should follow them in this, and so taking account of the fact that for P the set of tautologies is the same as the set of all logically valid formulas, we frame the following definition. PS is semantically complete if and only if every logically valid formula of P is a theorem of PS. Basically, I'm going to zoom in, if semantic consequence implies syntactic consequence. We went through this earlier when we were introducing the subjects. Let me put the reminder on the screen. So we easily proved correctness because we first compacted our system to 3 rules and 3 axioms and 1 direct consequence. So we proved that the 3 axiom schemas are logically valid, and most ponens is truth preserving, and that's it. So we have correctness. And now we need to prove the other side. So if a formula is true, can I prove it? And by true, we mean logically true, we mean tautology. Not just true in a particular model. Okay, so this doesn't really matter. The first proof of semantic completeness was given by Emil Post in 1920 for the propositional system of Principia Mathematica. There you go, Rupert. It is the same in principle, but laborious to execute in detail. Post himself, in his 1921 paper, takes only a page and a half over it, but his presentation involves lightning sketches of 4 mathematical inductions and the acceptance as theorems of about a score of tautologies. Post could take for granted the proofs of these theorems of the system as they were all in the Principia Mathematica. If we were to give proofs in PS for all the corresponding theorems and to present the inductions for the same sort of details we did in 26, our proof will be rather long. So we're just going to be giving an outline, which is like a general vibe-based, not completely rigorous. But basically what it Post did. For the Whitehead-Russell formulation of propositional calculus, we call it PM, Post gives an effective method for finding any formula A of PM, a formula accompanying formula D, AD, that is the disjunctive normal form, such that it is equivalent of A. So basically it turns A into the disjunctive normal form. And then Post gives an effective method for proving in the system any tautology of the system that is in the disjunctive normal form. Thanks for the hydrate. Now, suppose that A is a tautology of the system. If it's already in disjunctive normal form, then by 2, there is a recipe for proving it. If it is not, then there is a recipe for converting it into disjunctive normal form. So, yeah. That is a general outline. But as the book said, it's kind of long-winded and it applies mostly for the Whitehead-Russell formulation. The one we went through in my classes is the Kalmar method. Which is funny because calmado, cálmate, calmar. This proof for a system with additional connectives and some different axioms was first given by Laszlo Kalmar, I hope I pronounced it correctly, in 1935. For the proof, we need to know that for arbitrary formulas A, B, and C of P, the following are theorems of PS. So we just prove that. So basically, this is just an expansion of the the three axiom schemas. Kalmar is your favorite economist? Is that the same Kalmar? It would be really funny if it's the same Kalmar. Which Kalmar do you mean? Oh, okay, no, just because the name sounds like because a lot of people in this area, they did a lot of foundational work in other methods. For example, Turing, obviously of computer fames, John von Neumann was also involved in a lot of foundational mathematics. Is it really John von Neumann, or did they just meme him? Yeah, it's John von Neumann. Anyways. For example, we earlier saw a proof of identity. A implies A. A implies B implies A is our axiom 1. A implies B implies C implies blah blah blah, blah is our axiom 2. A Kalmar type proof will work for any system for which all formulas of any of those 7 patterns are theorems and NP most ponens is a rule of inference. Showing that all formulas of P of any of those 7 patterns are theorems is a rather playful exercise involving no new foundational ideas, and the reader who wants only the basic ideas of the proof should skip the next pages and go straight to the statement of the lemma that is the heart of the proof, metatheorem 31.14 on page 100. Okay, so the groundwork implies proving all these 7 items through our 3 axioms and most ponens. Some of them are given for free, but it's rather tedious, and it's like, yeah, look at those chicharrones, man. Look at those longanizas. Sorry, for those who are not Mexican, chicharrón and longaniza are 2 types of Mexican cured meats, and they tend to be rather long. So, in Mexican mathematics, we tend to call particularly large formulas chicharrones or longanizas. Yeah, this one is striped, yeah. So, again, we could do this, but this far exceeds the work of an entry-level mathematics into the mathematics course. So we'll just go to page 100. Okay. Let A be any formula of P whose only distinct propositional symbols are enumerable. That just means B plus 1 to the K. Okay. So what this means is that Kalmar is going to build another proof by mathematical induction on the amount of propositional symbols. That's why we turned A, B, and C into P1, P2, P3. So if there is only one propositional symbol, we only have P1, 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 P1. Then we have P1 and P2, P1, P2, P3, and so on. That's the reason why we went to the P apostrophe notation, so they can be easier to enumerate. Let I be an arbitrary interpretation of P. I assigns a set of truth values to the propositional symbols of A, for example, to B1 or to B to any enumeration. We define B1E as follows. If I applies true to B1, then B1 to the 1 is B1 itself. So it's just one formula and it's assigned true. If I assigns F to B1, then B1 to the I is to be not B. Similarly, let A1 be either A or not A according to A as is true or false for I. Then A is a consequence of at least one possible assignment of truth values of an arbitrary but enumerable sequence of symbols of any formula B in PS. Explanation. Intuitively, what the lemma says is this. Let A be any formula of P with k distinct propositional symbols. So P1, P2, P3, P to the k. K is any arbitrary natural number. Write out the truth table for A in the standard way, which we know we can do, even though it's just very difficult or tedious. Then for each row of the truth table, a distinct syntactic consequence relation holds in PS. Basically, we have our truth table. 1, 2, 3, 4. And here we have B, B to the K. Each row is a distinct address, a distinct sequence of true and false, a distinct digit in binary, and we can assign a specific syntactic consequence for each row. For each row, the relation is this. If a propositional symbol is assigned the letter T, then write it to the left of the syntactic sign. If it is assigned F, then write its negation to the left of the sign. If A is assigned to true, then assign A to the right of the syntactic sign. If A is assigned F, then write not A. Ah, look, there is a much clearer example. Let A be an arbitrary formula. In this case, P1 implies not P2 implies not P3. It doesn't matter which of the P, P2, P3 we take to be blah, blah, blah. It only matters that we can enumerate them and order them. So we can just assign them in an arbitrary way. Then A equals B1 implies not B2 implies not B3. And its truth table is as follows. Then the lemma tells us that 8 syntactic consequence relationships hold in the case of A. In the row 1, where all are true. In the row 2, where the first one is false, we negate it. The negation of this implies this. It is vital to see the following point. Every syntactic consequence relation holds simply in virtue of the syntactic properties of PS. In proving the lemma, we refer to the interpretations of P, but every syntactic consequence relation asserted by the lemma holds independently of any interpretation of P. What we basically have done is generate a method for getting very specific consequence relationships in a constructible way. So we have created a machine that creates syntactic relationships based on a very mechanical distribution of truth and falsehood of the propositional letters. So the 8 syntactic consequence relations of the example belong to pure proof theory of PS, and in stating them all, reference to the interpretation of P simply drop out. So what we have built is an engine to cover all possible truth functional cases for the consequence relationship in our proof system. The presence both in the statement and of the lemma and in its proof of references to interpretation of P tends to obscure this vital point. Proof of the lemma. The proof is by mathematical induction, there we go, on the number n of connectives of the formula A. If there are no connectives, then A is a single unnegated propositional symbol. So the lemma reduces for B1 implies B1, in which case I implies true to B, and not B implies not B. So both of these hold by 23.1, which is that the fact that every formula implies itself. So that is obviously true. Inductive step. So we believe it holds for all previous steps, but not the next one. there are two cases to be considered. The cases are either negation or conditional. The case 1 is simple. It's just the inversion. A is true for I, so we go to the previous step. If A is true for the interpretation, then C, the formula, the previous formula in the step, has to be false. Because we're dealing with a case in which A is the same formula as before, but with one more negation. And because negation switches, then if A is true, then the formula without the negation has to be false. Since C has fewer than n connectives we have by the induction hypothesis, so in this case, A can only be a negation of previous formula, and C has to have already have been validated because it's an inductive step. So the second step is the one that I'm not clear how to explain. C has to be false for the interpretation. And if it's false for interpretation, then the negation has to be true. I think that's it. I don't know how to explain something more basic. It's just, we already know that the negation switches. So the previous step, which is already validated, means that the only possible combination of cases, the only possible case it can be true for A being true for the interpretation, is in which A is not C, and not C means it has to be true. In order for it to be true, C has to be false. And that's it. If A is false for the interpretation, then we're dealing with a case with double negation. But the double negation is equal to just the formula. And that's it. I mean, just switching things twice leads us to where we started, so which is what we want, indeed. So the only really interesting case, or well, I mean, it's kind of interesting, but more mystifying case is which we have the formula A is composed of C implies D, where both C and D are formulas of lesser complexity than A. So this eventually collapses everything to the truth table of the conditional. We'll see. So we have three subcases. C is false, D is false, and C is true and D is false. So remember that in these two cases, the conditional is true, and this is the only case in which the conditional is false. Now, there is a case in which both C and D are true, but that's trivial. It collapses into either 2A or 2B. So if C is false, then A is true. Because if C is false under interpretation, then we can get not C. But by the rule, by the schema in 31.2, which we assume, we proved this earlier. Not earlier. We proved this. We showed this in a homework. This is Clavius. We know this is the case in our system. A falsehood implies that the formula implies whatever. So by most ponens, because we already have not C by the induction hypothesis, we have C implies D. But C implies D is A, which is what we want. So we know that it's true. D is true. Okay, C is the same case, but instead of Clavius, we do conditionalization. Conditionalization is our first axiom schema. A implies B implies A. So because we already know that D is true by induction hypothesis, then we know that C implies D is true, which is what we want. So, yeah. Okay, so the only case remaining is C is true and D is false, which means the condition is false. Then A is false for the interpretation, because so, and so we want the negation of the conditional. By the induction hypothesis, we get that C is true, or is proven, and D is false, which means that we can prove the negation. Sorry, Rupert, that sucks. I know, Twitch is fucky. Yeah, we're back. Okay, cool. And maybe once I grow as a streamer, we'll get more subs. I know this is not particularly salient or eye-catching, but I really like it, so whatever. If C is true and D is false, then that means by the induction hypothesis that we can prove C and we can prove not D. But by a previous schema, we get this. C implies that not D implies the negation of the conditional, which means we can just build it by this and just those two modus ponens after. We can get the negation of C implies D, which is our stipulated formula of A. So there we go. So finally, the semantic completeness theorem for propositional logic. Every logically valid formula of P is a theorem of PS. Or, if A is a consequence of nothing, then A is a theorem. Proof. Let A be an arbitrary logically valid formula of P with distinct propositional symbols B1 to Bk for any enumerable amount. Let I and J be interpretations of P that differ only in that I assigns T to Bk while J assigns F to Bk. So basically, I and J are two interpretations or two rows of the truth table in which the only difference is that the last propositional letter in I is true and in the second one is false. Then, by the lemma which we just proved, A is provable under the interpretation I, A is provable under the interpretation J. Okay, so the only difficult part is understanding 3 and 4. J1 is the same as I except in the previous step. Basically, because J assigns the falsehood, we will get that the propositional letter which is in dispute, which is the last one, it is true and basically equal in the case of K, and the negation is the case and defined as equal in the case of K. But the formula A has to be logically valid, which means that it is the case regardless of how it is assigned. So K basically does nothing. From 1 and 4 we get, and 6 we get the following. Okay. 1 says that we can prove A from this. 4 says that basically the last propositional letter is the same as K. And 6 we get that A is equal regardless of interpretation. What it means is that we are showing that we have a syntactic machine that regardless of the content or the interpretation of the last proposition letter to show up in the truth table, or whatever order we have. So if we have P1, P2, P3, P4, and we eventually get to P6, we have shown that the interpretation of P6 is irrelevant to A. So we cut one off. We cut P6, and then we get one less and one less and one less. But because this last member is arbitrary, we can just keep going. We can just repeat over and over and over and over and over and over. By repeating the set of moves made above with obvious changes, we can eliminate bk minus 1 from the argument, just as we eliminated bk. So if we cut the last one, and then if we cut the last one, we cut the previous one, we do reverse induction, with like, basically induction, and so on until we have eliminated everything to the left of the sign, and we're simply left with this. But A was an arbitrary logically valid formula of P, so if this, then that. What this means in my interpretation, in my way of understanding logic, is that theorems do not carry any information by themselves. They are not dependent on any content other than the very structures of the system themselves. So, really, the reason why we can do this in propositional logic is because both its truth tables and its truth functions and its rows and everything regarding its semantic apparatus is finite. Theorems are dependent, but are not the structures themselves. In propositional logic, they collapse into the same thing. In systems which are not complete, you can have things that are theorems, but it is debatable whether they reflect the structures of the system they're in. It's a matter of philosophical debate. Ultimately, what we have proven is that this system preserves truth through its semantic apparatus, and this system preserves consequence through its syntactic apparatus. Any formula that is truth functionally true can be proven. And if you prove something, it is truth functionally true. propositional logic is a model of the ideal environment in which mathematicians would like to exist. Propositional logic is very well behaved. If you prove something, it is true. If it is true, you can prove it. There are these guarantees. The problem is that particularly completeness, can only come across by having a very small, finite amount of interpretations and expressive power. We can express certain relationships such as transitivity, commutativity, and so on with propositional logic. But how do we express something like I don't know. How about this? Some people study logic. Because in propositional logic we can only model statements, we will need to express some people study logic as P. All people who study logic are nerds as Q. And some people are nerds as R. Propositional logic cannot describe the structure, the reasoning embedded in this. It is not expressive enough to understand things such as some people or all people. Mathematicians, particularly mathematicians at the later half of the 19th century, what they really want is to work with sets. Sets are a very powerful tool in the mathematician's arsenal. And propositional logic, while being described by sets, it cannot express sets. So we're gonna need a stronger system, a more powerful system, one that can actually express that kind of relationship. An infernal engine to defeat all infernal engines? No. But a really good one. We're gonna need a system that can express relationships between sets and properties. So this is going to be turned into this. There exists at least some people such that if they are people, then those things study logic. Everyone who studies logics is a nerd. Therefore, we're gonna need some extra elements to allow us to explain or express things such as there are elements in the set of P. P, in this case, being people. The set of S being the things that study logic, and N being the set of things that are nerds. So this, in our real system, the system that we actually wanted to see all along, which is first order logic, means that there exists an X such that if this X is in P, then this X is in S. But everyone that is in S, is also in N. Therefore, there exists some people in the N set, the nerd set. But the good thing is, the good news, this functions exactly the same way as before. This is the conditional we all know and love. And so will be the negation, the conjunction, the disjunction, and so on and so on. So the only new elements that we're going to see in our first order logic next week are exists for all and predicates. Similar rules, mostly similar rules. Instead of talking about statements, we're going to be analyzing predicates to say something of a group. That is how we're going to define predicates. But that is first order logic, and I hope y'all enjoyed today's session. It was rather tough, I know. But we caught a glimpse into what real mathematics and what real proof is. Those monstrous chorizos with all those symbols, that is hard work. But the creativity and the ingenuity of making those proofs by inductions, that's the real goal. That's real mathematics. And we learned that mathematics can be this weird self-reflective trip in which mathematics can be studied by mathematics. Anyways, thanks you all for joining me. Very long session today, but I hope it was worth it. I'll see you all next week. Goodbye.